They say you never truly know your children until money is involved. I used to laugh at that, thinking my David would never betray me, not after everything I had poured into his life. But the morning I stepped onto his new yacht, dressed in the navy dress Robert had always said, made my eyes shine. I began to learn the cruel truth. David had called me himself, which should have been my first warning. Normally, everything went through his assistant, but that morning, his voice had carried warmth, even nostalgia. Mom, let's celebrate. Just the three of us. We want to toast your recovery. You're stronger now, and we're so grateful. After my hip surgery, I had been craving connection. The loneliness after Robert's death still weighed heavy on me. And so, like a fool desperate for affection, I believed him. The yacht was gleaming white, nearly blinding in the sun, and far larger than anything Robert and I had ever owned. I paused at the dock, gripping my cane for balance, staring at the name painted in gold along its side. The Vanessa, my daughter-in-law's name. A chill touched my spine, though I smiled as David hugged me, careful but distant, the way you'd greet an investor, rather than your own mother. Beautiful, isn't she? He said, gesturing toward the vessel. Pure luxury. 42 feet. We're planning a trip to the Caribbean next month. I nodded, though inside I burned. The money. I had given them $3 million last year for David's consulting firm, at least, that's what he claimed. Looking at this boat, I knew exactly where the money had gone. Vanessa, waiting on deck, in a flowing silk cover-up, smiled the kind of smile you'd see on a predator right before it struck. We set sail under a clear Massachusetts sky. Vanessa poured champagne, refilled my glass too generously, and spoke breezily about their plans to renovate my old home, the one I had signed over after Robert died because I thought downsizing would be simpler. I sipped politely, though unease curled in my chest. Then David shifted the conversation. Casual questions at first. About my health. About how I'd been sleeping. About whether the medications made me forgetful. His eyes lingered too long, his tone too rehearsed, and then came the real subject. My will. The trust. Probate can be such a nightmare, Mom, he said, almost kindly. We just want to make sure everything's simple, that you're taken care of, that nothing gets lost. I set my glass down. David, I'm not confused. I know exactly where my assets are. That's when I noticed Vanessa's phone. She wasn't taking selfies, though she pretended to. She was filming me slightly tilted, catching me mid-sip, mid-sentence, tipsy in the morning sun. Evidence. Manufactured confusion. The pieces slid together with horrifying clarity. The power of attorney papers they'd pushed me to sign in the hospital, claiming it was just to help pay bills. The financial advisor who had stopped returning my calls. The questions about memory loss. I straightened. I'd like to go back to shore now. David's expression hardened, the warmth vanishing. His voice grew colder. I'm afraid that's not going to happen. And then Vanessa leaned close, her breath hot against my ear, her words slicing like knives. Say hi to the sharks. With one sharp shove, I was falling. The world tilting, water rushing up to claim me. The shock of the Atlantic hit me like 1,000 knives. Freezing water clawed at my skin, dragging the breath from my lungs. For a moment, I thought this was it, that my son and his wife had succeeded in writing my ending. Above me, the white hull of the yacht loomed, already pulling away, its engine growling against the waves. I kicked, gasping as my head broke the surface. David! I screamed, salt water burning my throat. For a fleeting second, I saw him at the railing, hands raised as though in panic. He was shouting, Mom! Oh God! Mom! But his voice was hollow, rehearsed, and then Vanessa's head appeared beside him, her phone pressed to her ear, her tone cool. Yes, she said. She went over. Make sure the petition is filed first thing Monday. Petition. Emergency guardianship. Power of attorney. It all snapped into focus. They weren't just trying to kill me. They were erasing me, replacing me with paperwork that said I was incompetent, dead, disposable. The waves dragged at my navy dress, heavy fabric pulling me down. I kicked off my shoes, arms burning, hip aching from the surgery. Every stroke was agony, but survival was an instinct I hadn't lost. Robert and I had swum laps every summer morning for decades. My body remembered. Even if my son wished it hadn't, the yacht grew smaller, white against the horizon, until it was gone. Just me, the endless Atlantic, and the betrayal that cut deeper than the cold. I thought of Robert, how he would have fought, how he'd once told me, "Margaret, you're stronger than you think." I clung to that memory as if it were a life raft. And then, like a miracle, I saw it. A fishing boat, paint-chipped, nets hanging from the side. A man stood at the wheel, weathered face squinting against the glare. I waved wildly, coughing, praying. Minutes later, strong arms hauled me aboard. The deck smelled of diesel and salt, a blanket rough with motor oil wrapped around my shoulders. "Holy hell, lady," the man said, voice deep and steady. "What happened to you?" My family," I choked out, teeth clattering. "They pushed me," he swore under his breath. "Name's Jake Morrison. Here's my grandson, Tyler. The boy, maybe 17, wide-eyed and pale, handed me another blanket. We saw that yacht tearing off. Didn't look back once. I closed my eyes, pain and rage flooding through me. Because they think I'm dead." Jake studied me, eyes sharp beneath his weathered brow. "You want me to call the Coast Guard?" "No." My voice cracked, desperate. "If they know I survived, they'll try again. Please." "Not yet." Jake hesitated, then nodded slowly, as though weighing my soul. "Sometimes the right thing isn't the official thing," he muttered, reaching for the radio. "Coast Guard, this is the Molly Sue. False alarm. Just debris in the water. All clear." He turned back to me. "So, Margaret, what's your plan?" I gripped the blanket tighter, shivering but steady. My son and his wife thought they had won, thought they had fed me to the sea, but they had underestimated me. "I'll let them believe I'm gone," I whispered, voice hardening with resolve. "And then I'll destroy them." Jake grinned, fierce and approving. "Now that's a plan worth helping with." Jake's boat pulled into a narrow cove I had never seen before. The kind of place only a man who'd worked these waters for decades would know. The dock was little more than weathered planks nailed together, but it was hidden, invisible from the main channels. As Tyler tied us off, Jake looked at me with something between pity and admiration. "You're safe here for now," he said. "But if you're serious about fighting back, you're going to need more than anger. You'll need allies." He was right. I was still trembling from cold, but beneath that tremor was a fire I hadn't felt in years. My son had planned my death, and worse, he had believed it would be easy. He thought his mother was weak, fragile, disposable. But he had forgotten who raised him, the woman who built a life beside a man like Robert, who'd run a household, managed a fortune, and survived heartbreaks that would have broken others. Jake led me to a weather-beaten inn that overlooked the cove. "Mrs. Chen runs this place," he explained. "Cash only. No questions asked." Mrs. Chen appeared at the door, as though conjured by his words. She was in her 70s, compact, her silver hair twisted into a bun. She took one look at me, soaked, shivering, draped in Jake's blanket, and simply nodded. Within minutes, I was seated at her kitchen table, a steaming bowl of chicken soup in front of me. "Don't bother explaining," she said briskly, ladling more broth into my bowl when I tried to speak. "I've seen enough people running from trouble to know when someone needs shelter. Just remember, trouble has a way of following." "I'm not running," I said, voice firmer than I expected. "I'm fighting back." Jake leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Then you'd better start by figuring out what story they're telling the world." He was right. After dinner, Mrs. Chen led me to her office, where an ancient computer sat on a desk. The internet was slow, but it worked. My obituary was already online. Margaret Harrison, beloved widow of Robert Harrison, lost in a tragic boating accident. She will be remembered for her grace, her charity, and her battle with memory decline. Memory decline. Dementia. Exactly the narrative David and Vanessa had planted. There was even a photo of me from last year confused at David's birthday party, when they had deliberately lured me into a surprise gathering without telling me. My bewilderment had been genuine, but not from disease, from manipulation. The cruelty of it made me clench my fists. They weren't just trying to steal my fortune, they were erasing me, rewriting me into a fragile, senile woman too incompetent to defend herself. And now, to the world, I was gone. But there was power in being dead. Dead women weren't watched. Dead women couldn't testify. Dead women could move in shadows, gathering proof. That night, wrapped in borrowed clothes and an old quilt, I began writing everything I remembered. Dates, conversations, suspicious events, the forged papers David had brought to the hospital, the financial advisor who had suddenly stopped returning my calls, the way Vanessa had accidentally mixed up my medications. Piece by piece, the pattern emerged like a map of betrayal. Jake sat across from me, his weathered hands cradling a mug of coffee. "You know," he said quietly, "most people in your position would just run. Start fresh somewhere else. But not you." I looked up from my notes, meeting his steady gaze. "Because it's not just about me. If they did this to me, they'll do it to others. They've already done it. This isn't just greed. It's a machine." Mrs. Chen, knitting in the corner, nodded once. "Then you'd better sharpen your knives, Margaret. You're not just fighting your family. You're fighting an empire." I set down my pen, feeling the weight of her words. For the first time since the yacht, I wasn't shivering. I was planning. And I knew one thing with absolute certainty. David and Vanessa thought they had killed me, but I was very much alive, and I was coming for them. 4 days later, I stood behind a row of cedar trees on the edge of Greenwood Cemetery. Binoculars pressed to my eyes. The wind cut sharp, but I hardly noticed. I was watching my own funeral. The casket, empty of course, gleamed under the spring sun, surrounded by flowers that must have cost thousands. David and Vanessa stood in perfect black, their faces a study in grief, so convincing it could have won awards. David shook hands with business associates. Vanessa dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. And both accepted condolences, as though they truly were bereaved children. Beside me, Jake muttered, "If I didn't know better, I'd believe them." But I did know better. I knew those tears were rehearsed, those embraces carefully staged. My son's words floated across the graveside service as the priest recited prayers. "She struggled with memory issues," David said, his voice breaking just enough. "We worried about her safety every day." I bit back bile. They weren't just burying me in an empty casket. They were burying my dignity, my reputation, my truth. As mourners passed, I studied not who was there, but who wasn't. My lawyer, Patricia Walsh, absent. My accountant, Michael Torres, nowhere to be seen. My financial advisor, Richard Barnes, missing. These were people who had been constants in Robert's and my affairs, and yet they hadn't come to honor a woman supposedly worth $3 billion. The absence spoke louder than words. See it? Jake asked, lowering his own binoculars. I nodded. They're in on it, or at least some of them. They don't show up because they know the funeral is a lie. When the service ended, I watched David and Vanessa work the crowd like seasoned politicians. Vanessa leaned into hugs, her mascara artfully smudged. David bowed his head solemnly. They ushered people along quickly if anyone lingered too long, steering conversation back to safe platitudes. The performance was flawless, and it made me furious. By the time Jake drove me back to Mrs. Chen's inn, I was shaking again, not from cold this time, but from rage. Inside, I spread my notes across her kitchen table. The timeline was becoming clearer. Months of staged confusion, coached doctors' visits, forged power of attorney documents, and now, a full-scale charade of my death. What's your next move? Jake asked. I need proof, I said. More than my word. Something that can burn through their lies. That night, I slipped through the back streets of Beacon Hill, like a thief breaking into her own past. The house Robert and I had shared for 35 years still bore my touch. The rose bushes I had planted, the brass knocker I had polished every Sunday. My key slid into the lock, as though no time had passed. Inside, the air smelled of polish and expensive leather. Sheets draped old furniture, but new pieces gleamed beneath luxury sofas. Imported rugs, things I had never bought. In the refrigerator, fresh produce and imported cheeses suggested frequent use. They had kept this place, not as a shrine but as a base. In Robert's old study, I found it the beating heart of their conspiracy. Papers, charts, medical reports, even a timeline labeled The Margaret Project. My name reduced to a project title, as though I were a business acquisition rather than a mother. They had documented every staged lapse, every manipulated photo, every coincidental medication error. My rage grew with every page I photographed, using the disposable camera Jake had given me. Then came the sound that froze me. A car door slamming. Voices. Keys in the lock. David and Vanessa were home. I slipped toward the back door, heart hammering. When I heard it, a baby's cry from somewhere inside the house. A baby. My son and daughter-in-law had never mentioned children. The sound rooted me to the spot with a chilling realization. This wasn't just about my fortune anymore. There was another layer, darker than I'd imagined. I escaped into the garden as headlights washed across the windows. Behind me, the baby's cries pierced the night. Ahead of me lay questions I wasn't ready to answer, but one thing was clear. My family's betrayal had grown even more sinister. Jake picked me up 3 blocks away, and as soon as I climbed into his truck, he studied my face. You look like you've seen a ghost. Worse, I said, still trembling. I've seen my replacement. I told him about the baby, about the papers I had photographed, about the chilling way David and Vanessa had reduced me to a project. Jake gripped the wheel tighter, his jaw set. They never said anything about having a child, did they? Never. Which means either they've been lying, or that baby isn't theirs at all. We drove to a small photo shop in Gloucester, a place Jake trusted. While the film developed, I stared at the ocean through the windshield, my mind circling around the infant's cries echoing in my memory. What kind of monsters would fake a child to secure an inheritance? Or worse, what if they had stolen one? When the photos came back, they were even worse than I imagined. Clear evidence of their year-long conspiracy. Forged medical records, fabricated dementia reports, and financial spreadsheets calculating my posthumous worth. But one paper stopped my breath cold. A birth certificate tucked among the files. Baby Harrison, born 3 weeks ago. Mother, Vanessa Harrison. Father, David Harrison. But I'd seen Vanessa just days before on that yacht. She had been fit, flawless, parading in a designer sundress, not a woman recovering from childbirth. "This certificate is fake," I whispered. Jake leaned over my shoulder. "So, whose baby is it?" That night I lay awake in Mrs. Chen's inn, staring at the ceiling. Every beat of my heart echoed with one thought. This wasn't just about stealing my money. There was a larger machine at work, one that manufactured heirs as easily as forged wills. At breakfast the next morning, Mrs. Chen listened quietly while I poured everything out. Then she put down her teacup with a decisive clink. "You need someone who can dig deeper. Not just a fisherman, and an old woman with a spare room. You need a professional." "I can't go to the police yet," I protested. "David and Vanessa would spin it as dementia. I need proof." "Not the police," Mrs. Chen said. "A private investigator." And that's how I found myself a few hours later sitting in a cramped office above a sandwich shop, staring across a desk at Danny Crawford, a wiry man in his 52nd, with prematurely gray hair and sharp, relentless eyes. "So, let me get this straight," he said after I finished my story. "Your son and daughter-in-law staged your death to steal your fortune, forged a baby into existence, and may have someone on the inside feeding them information. And you want me to follow them without letting them know you're alive." "That's right." Danny leaned back, studying me. "You're either crazy or the bravest widow in Boston. Lucky for you, I like impossible cases." I slid an envelope of cash across the desk. "Emergency funds Robert had insisted we keep hidden." Danny tucked it into a drawer, then gave me a thin smile. "12 hours from now, we'll start to see how deep this rabbit hole goes." No. For the first time since that awful shove off the yacht, I felt a flicker of control. My enemies thought I was dead. That gave me the one weapon they didn't expect: time. And I intended to use every second of it. Danny Crawford wasted no time. By the end of his first full day on the case, he had uncovered more about David and Vanessa's movements than I had managed in months. He spread photographs across Mrs. Chen's kitchen table, grainy shots of my son entering banks, Vanessa stepping out of sleek law offices, the two of them together at a modern building of steel and glass. "Whitmore Reproductive Services," Danny explained, tapping the photo. "Very exclusive, very expensive. They specialize in surrogacy for high-profile clients who want privacy." The words chilled me. I stared at the glossy facade, remembering the baby's cry in my old home. "You're saying they bought a baby?" Danny nodded grimly. "Arrangements were made months ago, paid in cash, and they requested a newborn who could pass as theirs. Birth certificate included in the package." Mrs. Chen clutched her teacup so tightly I feared it would shatter. "They killed you for money and bought a child to make sure the story sticks." But Danny wasn't finished. He pulled out another photograph. A woman in her 40s with auburn hair, a sharp suit, and a leather briefcase. She stood shaking hands with David outside a downtown office. "Meet Miranda Torres," Danny said. "Partner at Morrison and Torres, estate planning specialists. She's been building a reputation for what she calls family transition planning. My sources say she's helped at least half a dozen families accelerate inheritances when elderly relatives became inconvenient." The name hit me like ice water. Torres. I remembered her from a charity gala 6 months ago. She'd been unusually interested in my estate, asking probing questions about my trusts and beneficiaries. At the time, I had brushed it off as networking. Now I knew better. Danny slid more surveillance photos across the table. Miranda entering hospitals, meeting with other families, walking out of probate offices with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "She's your MT," Danny said simply. Mrs. Chen let out a low whistle. And she's been hunting seniors like you for years. How many? I whispered. Danny's eyes were flat. I can't prove exact numbers yet, but I suspect at least a dozen. Maybe more. All wealthy. All with relatives who suddenly inherited after suspicious accidents. The room spun around me. This wasn't just about my betrayal. I had stumbled into a criminal enterprise, targeting the elderly, manipulating families into murder, and then laundering the results through the legal system. Danny placed one last document in front of me. My will, or rather, what looked like my will. My signature at the bottom, but the text completely rewritten. They filed this yesterday, Danny said. Leaves everything to David, with provisions for any future children, meaning the baby. I sank into my chair, my breath ragged. My son wasn't just greedy. He was complicit in a machine that manufactured heirs, fabricated deaths, and stole lives without remorse. They think I'm gone, I murmured. They're erasing me from the world. Then it's time, Danny said, voice low and steady, to let them know the dead don't stay buried forever. The hardest part of coming back from the dead isn't surviving the betrayal or the ocean. It's choosing how to reappear. Danny urged caution, but I wasn't interested in hiding. If David and Vanessa thought they had buried me, then it was time to haunt them. I don't want them to just know I'm alive, I told Danny and Mrs. Chen as we sat around her kitchen table. I want them off balance, afraid, making mistakes. Mrs. Chen's eyes glimmered with approval. Psychological warfare. Now that, I can respect. The plan was deceptively simple. While David and Vanessa met with Miranda Torres downtown to finalize the transfer of my fortune, I would send them a message they could not ignore. Something subtle enough to shake them, but undeniable enough to confirm that I was still here. Danny arranged the delivery. At exactly 11:47 a.m., a smartly dressed courier walked into Torres's office, carrying an elegant envelope addressed in my handwriting. Inside was a single note. Dear David and Vanessa, reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. We need to talk. Love, Mom. P.S. Give my regards to little Robert Sarah. He's beautiful. According to Danny, the effect was immediate. All three bolted from the office. Faces pale, papers forgotten. For the first time, they realized the ghost of Margaret Harrison walked among the living. But I wasn't finished. That afternoon, I returned to the house I had once called home. Carol, the unsuspecting nurse caring for the baby, opened the door with wide, frightened eyes. She'd seen my face in every newspaper obituary. You're supposed to be dead, she whispered. Not quite, I said gently, stepping past her. And then I saw him tiny, perfect, with those serious brown eyes. My grandson. My pulse slowed as I cradled him, knowing exactly why I had to fight. When David and Vanessa came home later, flushed with panic, they found me waiting in Robert's old armchair. The look on their faces was worth every risk. Hello, darlings, I said softly. How was your meeting? For the first time in years, I held all the power. The front door swung open, and there they were, David clutching his keys like a lifeline, Vanessa dressed in her immaculate black, her eyes already scanning the room. The moment their gaze landed on me, sitting calmly in Robert's old armchair, the world seemed to stop. Vanessa's scream split the air, high-pitched and panicked, while David's jaw simply dropped. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost, and in a sense, he had. Hello, darlings, I said evenly, stroking the soft hair of the infant in my arms. How was your meeting? For several seconds they didn't move, didn't breathe. Finally, David stammered, Mom, we thought you drowned. The Coast Guard. The Coast Guard searched for debris, not survivors, I interrupted smoothly. A clever trick, really, when no one actually reports a person overboard. Vanessa's face hardened, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. This is insane, she spat. You can't just walk in here pretending. Pretending? I rose slowly, every motion deliberate. You pushed me into the ocean, Vanessa. You recorded me. You forged my signature. You manufactured a narrative about dementia. Do you want to see the evidence? I dropped a manila folder on the coffee table. Out spilled surveillance photos of them entering Whitmore Reproductive Services, payment ledgers in David's handwriting, forged medical reports with Miranda Torres's signature. Each page landed like a stone, and with each one, the color drained further from my son's face. David swallowed hard. This isn't what it looks like. And, 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 it's exactly what it looks like. I snapped, my voice rising for the first time. Murder. Fraud. Conspiracy. You bought a child on the black market after arranging the death of a 17-year-old girl. You tried to kill your own mother so you could inherit billions. And you thought the world would believe you. Vanessa's eyes narrowed to slits. Prove it, she hissed. You can make all the accusations you want, but without proof. I reached into my pocket and set a small recorder beside the stack of documents. The red light blinked steadily. I already have. Every word you've said since walking through that door has been recorded. Every admission, every denial, every slip. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then I heard the sound of tires screeching outside. The front door burst open, and armed federal agents flooded the room, weapons drawn. Behind them stepped Agent Sarah Chen, her badge gleaming under the overhead light. Miranda Torres, she called sharply as the woman herself appeared in the doorway. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, elder abuse, and racketeering. The room erupted into chaos. Miranda bolted for the kitchen, only to be tackled within seconds. David sagged onto the sofa, his face buried in his hands. Vanessa froze, her composure finally shattered, staring at me as though I had risen from the grave just to drag her down. I rocked the baby gently and looked at them one last time. You wanted me dead, I said softly. Instead, I'm here, and this time, you'll answer for everything.